today from the HartmannReport.com. It's titled, Americans Begged Politicians for Peaceful Progressive Revolution for 40 Years. Will it happen? And I started out with the story. On March 13th, 1962, President John F. Kennedy said, and I quote, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." And here we are. We have armed militias in our streets. We have violence in our state capitals, in our school boards, and on airplanes. And just 10 months ago, we saw an actual attempt at violent revolution in the U.S. Capitol. So what happened to that peaceful revolution? Here's the history. This is just a quick history of the last 40 years. First off, we had 12 years of Reagan-Bush, which completely exhausted Americans. I mean, there were the continual tax cuts on the rich, multiple tax cuts on the rich, pushing all kinds of federal money to the 1%. There was the war on working people that saw the unionization rate in this country drop by more than half. We needed a tax on the nation's social safety net. Reagan doubled our taxes for Social Security. So it was the largest tax increase on working people in history. One of 18 times that Reagan raised taxes on working class people. And he made Social Security benefits taxable for the first time since the program was put into place in the 1930s. He eliminated the ability of working class people to deduct interest payments on credit cards and car loans, all while cutting taxes on the morbidly rich. He dropped the top tax rate from 74% down to 25%. CEO pay exploded and no more tax revenue. We stopped building and repairing our infrastructure. For the first time since World War II, working class wages had gone flat, while expenses, particularly for housing, transportation, and healthcare, just exploded. Republican politicians stopped holding town halls and started hanging out with lobbyists. The gutting of the American middle class was underway, and we knew it. This was 1992, 12 years of Reagan and Bush. And so we said, hey, we need something different. How about a peaceful progressive revolution? And along came this new guy from Hope, Arkansas, who promised with his new covenant stump speech, quote, "The most irresponsible people of all in the 1980s, said Bill Clinton, were those at the top of the ladder, the inside traders, the quick buck artists, the S&L kingpins who looked out for themselves and not for the countries. CEOs, Clinton told us, who pay themselves 100 times what they pay the average worker, shouldn't get big pay raises unrelated to performance. If a company wants to overpay its executives and underinvest in the future or transfer jobs overseas, it shouldn't get special treatment and tax breaks from the Treasury." But that's not quite how he governed. He also said, Clinton, he promised us all Americans should have universal access to quality, affordable health care, not as a privilege, but as a right. But instead, he signed NAFTA, which Reagan had negotiated, began the it basically just continued Reagan's policies, at least his economic policies, transferring, tens of millions of jobs overseas. 60,000 factories closed in the United States as a result of this. Clinton tragically echoed Reagan, basically, declaring an end to welfare as we know it and an end to the era of big government. Healthcare became more expensive, and the number of people being imprisoned exploded, even as crime was going down. So we went for another peaceful revolution with George W. Bush in 2000. On the campaign trail, he had said, by far, the vast majority of my tax cuts will go to the bottom end of the spectrum. Of course, that's not how it worked out. Bush cut taxes on the very, very rich, like himself and his dynastic family. And we're still in the hole about $1 trillion a year from the Bush tax cuts. And he also promised that he was going to protect Social Security and Medicare. The Social Security surplus must be locked away only for Social Security, he said. Right. Instead, he pushed through a reform that made it a criminal matter for Medicare administrators to even try to negotiate pharmaceutical prices, and put a huge hole in Medicare with this notorious Medicare Advantage scam, which has now moved over 40% of seniors from actual Medicare to these privatized and usually for-profit Advantage plans with their in-network requirements and continual battles to get paid for services and things like that. So we said, okay, we want another peaceful revolution. And we went with Barack Obama in 2008. In his campaign, he promised to allow Medicare to negotiate cheaper drug prices, make it easier for workers to unionize, create 2 million new jobs by building new infrastructure all across the nation, close the loopholes in the deductibility of CEO pay to get that under control, and, quote, eliminate special tax breaks for oil and gas companies, including repealing special expensing rules, foreign tax credit benefits, and manufacturing deductions for oil and gas firms. None of that, of course, happened. Obama did nothing about the Medicare Advantage scam. Americans still didn't have a right to health care. Now, you know, and as if to, and a lot of Americans today are suffering under an average $5,900 in deductibles and copays from the Obamacare plans. Now, you know, it was a good start, right? I'm not totally trashing Obamacare here. It was a good start. And Obama did restore the reputation of our country after 8 years of torturers and murderers, you know, Bush and Cheney. But we didn't get what we asked for or were promised. And as if to add insult to injury, he refused for a year to use the bully pulpit of the White House to pressure Mitch McConnell into holding hearings on Merrick Garland. So we got another crazed right-winger. So then Donald Trump came along in 2016 and he said, oh, I've got your progressive revolution. Just give it to me. See, each one of these elections, we were promised a progressive revolution. Trump said he's going to give every American health care that is terrific and so much better, so much better. He said we're going to rebuild our aging infrastructure with a massive renovation program. He said I'm going to rescue and expand Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid without any program cuts. He promised to make medical marijuana available to all Americans. He said he was going to bring home all our jobs from China, Mexico, and Japan. He said he was going to tax. Ford at the time was planning on building a new factory in Mexico. He said, we will tax you 35% when you bring those cars back into the United States and any other company that moves overseas. Ford went ahead and built the plant. Trump never did anything. He said, I'm going to force Apple to make its computers, phones, and other products here in America again. Right. He said he was going to end all income taxes on couples earning less than $50,000 a year and that he was going to raise taxes on the rich, quote, so badly that my rich friends will hate me and it's going to cost me a fortune, end quote. He said he was going to require universal background checks for gun purchases and make sure that, quote, states are properly uploading criminal and mental health records, end quote. He said he was going to make federal funding available to help people addicted to prescription opioids and heroin. He said he was going to stop lobbyists from corrupting politicians and drain the swamp. Remember that chant? He said he was going to guarantee health care to all Americans, regardless of pre-existing conditions or income. And he was going to, quote, give 6 weeks of paid maternity leave to any mother with a newborn child whose employer does not provide the benefit, end quote. Which, by the way, is in the Build Back Better plan. None of that, of course, happened. Instead, it was largely the reverse. So in 2020, again, we tried a peaceful revolution. And we elected Joe Biden. And he's actually trying to keep the promises of a peaceful revolution for the first time in 40 years. He's got this Build Back Better program that expands Medicare to include vision and dental and hearing aids, would let Medicare negotiate drug prices, would provide free community college, would invest in green infrastructure, would give young families access to free or affordable pre-K education or childcare, and would fund it all by closing tax loopholes on the rich while slightly raising rates on people earning over $400,000 a year and on highly profitable corporations. 100% of Republicans in Congress are opposed to this. 100% of them. Do you want a peaceful revolution? Tough luck, buddy. That's the Republican mantra. And, of course, you got 2 sold-out Democrats who have joined the Republicans in this. Or are saying, what about my, Joe Manchin, what about my fossil fuel industry? And Kirsten Sinema, what about my friends in Big Pharma? They are openly defying the President of the United States and the leader of their party and the leader of the United States Senate. Now, frankly, I think that I was going to talk about Schumer. I'm not even going to get into that right now. Anyhow, meanwhile, we've got right-wing militias getting in the faces of school boards and taking over positions on election boards. There's this continuous undercurrent of talk on right-wing social media pages and groups about a second civil war. They've adopted the Confederate black flag, which meant no surrender, we will fight to our death, as one of their own. And Biden and Pelosi and Schumer are now engaged in this frantic negotiation with Sinema and Manchin to try to get what Americans have been begging for 40 years past. Somebody needs to tell Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable.